I'll never forget the sound of laughter that night. Not the kind that warms your chest or makes your heart light. No. This was sharp, cruel. It was the kind of laughter that pierces your skin and keeps echoing long after the room goes quiet. And it came from my own sister. The table was beautifully set, candles glowing, silverware neatly placed, the air filled with the smell of my cooking. I had spent hours, no days, perfecting the dishes. My hands ached from chopping, my hair smelled like garlic and butter, but I didn't care. This dinner wasn't just food. It was my pride, my heart on a plate. I wanted the guests, family, friends, neighbors, even a few people my sister had invited, to see me as more than the quiet, overlooked one. I wanted to shine. But instead I was burned alive under her laughter. The moment she lifted her fork, I knew she was waiting for it, the tiniest flaw. She poked at my roasted chicken like it was something foreign, sniffed the sauce like she was a critic on TV, and then she smiled. That smile. You know, the kind of smile that isn't a smile at all? The one where their lips curve but their eyes glint with venom? That was hers. Wow, she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Did you actually cook this, or is this some kind of science experiment? The table went silent. Everyone froze, eyes flicking from me to her. My chest tightened, but I forced a smile, trying to play it off. It's just roasted with some herbs. Oh, she cut me off, feigning a gag. Herbs. Right. Is charcoal an herb now? And that was it. The dam broke. She laughed, loud and theatrical, her shoulders shaking. The kind of laugh you put on when you want the whole room to join in. And they did. One chuckle from a guest. Then another. Then the sound spread, bouncing around the table until it felt like the entire world was laughing at me. I sat there frozen, cheeks burning, fingers gripping my napkins so tightly the fabric tore. The smell of the food that once made me proud now made me nauseous. My throat closed up, and my sister? She leaned back in her chair, sipping her wine like a queen watching her jester perform. She had humiliated me, and she was enjoying every second. I looked at the faces around me. Nobody defended me. Nobody told her to stop. Not even my parents. They just smiled awkwardly, some even covering their mouths to hide their laughter. It was like I had been stripped bare in front of everyone. My passion turned into a punchline. When the laughter finally died down, the room was filled with that heavy silence people use when they don't want to look at you. My hands shook as I tried to cut into my food, but I couldn't taste a thing. All I could taste was shame. I swallowed it, smiled weakly, pretended it didn't matter, but inside something cracked, because this wasn't the first time she had mocked me. It wasn't the first time she had turned my effort into a joke. But that night, in front of all those people, she went too far. Her laughter might have been the loudest sound in the room. But my silence? My silence was louder, because while she laughed, I was already thinking. Already planning. Already imagining the day I'd make her choke on her own medicine. She thought I was weak. She thought I'd just sit there and take it forever. But she was wrong. That night, while she slept peacefully in her room, smug from her little performance, I lay awake with fire in my chest. And I promised myself one thing. The next time she laughed at me, she wouldn't be laughing for long. The dinner table that night still felt like a battlefield. My sister, Rachel, sat across from me with that smug little smirk she always wore when she thought she'd won. She had embarrassed me in front of our guests, and she was basking in the glow of her so-called victory. But inside, I was burning. And when I burn, I don't burn quietly. The thing about Rachel is she always needed an audience. Her laughter was never just for herself. It was a performance. She wanted eyes on her, ears tuned in, and me, red-faced in the spotlight of her cruel jokes. And I let her do it for years. But not anymore. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, running through all the time she had chipped away at my confidence. Every insult, every eye roll, every snide comment she dropped when people were around. I realized something important. Rachel wasn't strong. She wasn't even clever. She was insecure. Her laughter was a weapon she used to distract people from seeing her own cracks. And suddenly, I knew exactly how to strike back. I didn't want to just get even. I wanted her to feel it, the way I had felt it, humiliated, exposed, stripped of her false power. So, I started planning. Not some childish prank, no. I wanted something smarter, sharper. Rachel loved one thing more than anything: control. She loved being the one pulling the strings, getting reactions, staying one step ahead. But what would happen if the strings snapped? What would happen if the audience she craved turned on her? That was the thought that made me finally close my eyes and smile. The plan wasn't ready yet. But the seed had been planted, and it was already growing roots. Rachel had no idea that the same kitchen she mocked me in would become the stage where I destroyed her reputation. The next morning, I made breakfast like nothing had happened. Scrambled eggs, toast, coffee. Rachel walked in, stretching dramatically like she had just come back from winning a marathon in her dreams. "Cooking again?" She smirked. "Brave of you." Her words cut like knives, but this time I didn't flinch. I slid a plate toward her, calm, quiet, collected. "You can try it or not. Doesn't matter to me." My voice was steady, and it shocked her. For the first time, I saw hesitation in her eyes. Like she didn't know how to react when I didn't give her the reaction she wanted. She took the fork anyway. One bite, chewed slowly. Then, like clockwork, her smirk returned. "Well, at least it's edible," she laughed. The old me would have snapped back or run off red-faced. But I just smiled. A small, knowing smile. "Glad you think so." Because while she thought she was mocking me again, I was studying her, watching her patterns, measuring the exact beats of her performance, and I realized something else. Rachel wasn't just insecure. She was predictable. She thrived on humiliating me, but only because she thought no one could ever flip the script on her. She believed she was untouchable. That's when I decided. My revenge had to happen publicly. It had to happen with witnesses. The same way she loved to embarrass me, I would embarrass her, and not with yelling. Not with insults, but with silence, timing, and one flawless move she would never see coming. So I waited. I cooked. I pretended. And every day I got sharper, calmer, more in control. Like a boxer training quietly before stepping into the ring. Rachel had no idea I was building a storm. She thought I was still the same girl she could laugh at, but the clock was ticking, and her moment was coming. The day of her downfall was closer than she thought, because the perfect opportunity was already knocking on our door. Cooking wasn't a hobby for me. It was the place I went when everything else felt loud and messy, a small, steady world where I could measure, taste, and make something real. My grandmother taught me how to fold dough with patience. My uncle showed me how to sear a perfect steak without fear. When I cooked, I felt like I belonged to myself for the first time. So when Rachel laughed at my dinner, she didn't just mock food. She mocked my soul. She dismissed the little universe I'd built, the late nights testing sauces, the afternoons spent watching technique videos, trying to get the timing right. That meal, every garnish, every sear, was hours of work and whispers of hope that maybe finally someone would see me. After the humiliation, I stopped telling people about my cooking experiments. I stopped posting pictures of my weekend bakes. It felt like I was putting my heart on a tray and having someone spit on it. But the thing about a craft is that it waits. The craft doesn't care if you boast or hide. It remembers the hands that practiced. It remembers the person who kept coming back. So I kept coming back. I enrolled in an evening culinary class at the community college. It was cheap, an opportunity I scraped together by taking extra shifts and skipping coffee and nights out. Small sacrifices that tasted like freedom. The classroom smelled of onions and ambition. The instructor was blunt and exacting, but he taught me things Rachel never could understand. The science of caramelization, the rhythm of mise en place, how silence becomes loud in a perfect roux. Cooking started to feel less like an escape and more like training for the moment I'd stop being invisible. I learned presentation, how to make a dish look like it belonged on a magazine cover, how to make a single bite tell a story. I learned confidence, too. It grew in me like yeast, slowly, until one day I could feel it lifting the edges of the old, ashamed girl. And that confidence made Rachel nervous. I noticed it in small ways. The sideways glance when I mentioned my class. The way she rolled her eyes at my new spatula set gift, pretending to care. She started to pepper conversations with little digs, commentary about how I was wasting time with classes, how I should focus on more practical things. It was always in front of other people, always designed to shrink me. Family favored her in ways that stung. Compliments came easier for Rachel. Her hair was natural perfection. Her selfies were conversation starters. Her every misstep turned into a charming anecdote. My triumphs were footnotes. When I told my mom about plating techniques, she smiled politely and changed the subject to Rachel's latest accomplishments. It felt endless. But every compliment Rachel collected was an opportunity for me. I listened, watched, and cataloged. I began to see this as a game of positioning. She loved the center of attention. She loved stages. So I would give her a stage. One where every light would shine on her, but on my terms. I started small. I cooked more often at home, but I also began bringing my dishes to small gatherings. A church potluck, a neighbor's barbecue, places where her audience could be found. I didn't announce it. I arrived quietly with a covered casserole, took my place in the corner, and watched. The trick was subtlety. If I threw a party or shouted my achievements, Rachel would brace herself, attack, and reinforce her narrative that I was desperate for attention. Instead, I let the food speak. I let people taste and think on their own. A whispered compliment at a potluck is more powerful than a shouted declaration. Then one night, the universe handed me an opening. My parents' anniversary was coming up, and my mom, still soft and vulnerable, still grieving in places, asked if I would cook for a small family dinner. Rachel lit up at the idea, claiming she would help, of course, eager to be seen as the helpful sister. But when my mom specifically asked me to take the lead, I saw something flicker across Rachel's face, something like panic masked as eagerness. This was it. The moment I could either hide like I'd always done or step forward with everything I'd learned. I didn't crave cruelty. I didn't want to break her for the sake of breaking. I wanted to reclaim my pride and show everyone, myself most of all, that I was more than a punchline. So I accepted the request, smiled to my mom, and started planning. Not a petty trap. Not a stunt. A meal so well-crafted, so honest, that it would leave no room for mockery. A meal that would make the table listen. Little did Rachel know, the menu would ask more of her than she'd expect. And I would be ready. The night was set, the menu planned, and Rachel thought she was still in charge, until the first course arrived and she realized she had been counting on the wrong thing. Other people's laughter. The night of my parents' anniversary dinner felt like walking into an arena. The house glowed with warm lights, the dining table polished until it gleamed, the silverware catching every flicker of the chandelier. My mom wore her favorite pearl earrings, my dad had put on his best tie, and the whole room carried that air of celebration. And then there was Rachel. She floated in like she owned the night, heels clicking, hair curled just right, lips painted red enough to command attention. She carried herself like a queen entering her throne room. "Ready to help me cook, sis?" she asked, her smile sugar-coated but sharp. I looked at her, calm, steady, the way a boxer looks at their opponent before the bell rings. "No," I said softly. "This one's mine." Her eyes narrowed for just a moment before she laughed, flipping her hair like my answer was some kind of joke. Fine, don't burn the place down. But beneath that laugh, I saw it again, that flicker of unease. I brought out the appetizers first, a tray of delicate bruschetta, each piece topped with roasted tomatoes, basil, and balsamic glaze. Simple, clean, elegant. The kind of thing that makes people stop mid-conversation for a second bite. The guests murmured in approval. "Wow, this is really good," one of my uncles said. "Did you make this yourself?" Another guest asked, looking at me, not Rachel. and for the first time in years, the spotlight shifted. It wasn't forced. It wasn't begged for. It just happened. I glanced at Rachel, who pretended not to notice, sipping her wine too quickly. Then came the main course. Seared chicken with a lemon butter sauce, roasted vegetables laid out like a painting, potatoes so creamy they almost melted at the touch of a fork. The aroma filled the room, wrapping everyone in warmth. Plates were passed around. Forks clinked. The room grew quiet, the kind of silence that only comes when people are too busy enjoying food to bother speaking. "This is incredible," my dad said, raising his glass toward me. My mom smiled proudly. "She's been working so hard. You can taste it." And just like that, the table's energy shifted completely. The laughter wasn't at me anymore. It was around me, because of me. Rachel's smile froze. She tried to wedge herself into the conversation, tossing in little jokes, trying to redirect attention. But it didn't work. Not this time, because this wasn't about me trying to prove myself. It was about me simply being who I was, finally, without shame. Every compliment that fell on me chipped away at her mask. I could see it. The tightening jaw, the restless fingers tapping her glass, the way her laughter turned brittle, empty. And in that moment, I realized something. I didn't even have to humiliate her. If I just shined in my own light, she'd crumble all by herself, but fate wasn't done. Because just as dessert was about to be served, Rachel made her move. She thought she could steal the spotlight back with one cruel joke. But what she didn't know was that dessert would turn the entire table against her. The table buzzed with chatter and praise. For once, the air didn't feel heavy on my shoulders. It felt light, almost buoyant, like every word of approval lifted me higher. My dad leaned back in his chair, smiling with pride, my mom's eyes shining in that quiet way only mothers do. And then Rachel struck. She tapped her glass with her fork, commanding attention like she'd done 1,000 times before. "Wow, you guys," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Who knew my little sister could actually cook?" Miracles do happen. The table went uncomfortably quiet. A few forced chuckles escaped, but they sounded hollow, unsure. I didn't flinch. Not this time. Instead, I smiled, calm, steady, and walked back into the kitchen. When I returned, I carried the dessert tray. Chocolate lava cakes, each one perfectly baked, the centers ready to melt with the first spoonful. They were plated with fresh berries, powdered sugar dusted lightly over the top, as elegant as anything in a restaurant. Gasps, compliments, even applause. And there she was, Rachel, her face tight, her eyes darting, her smirk gone. I set a plate in front of her. "Careful," I said lightly. "It might be too rich for you." The table chuckled. But this time, they were laughing with me. Rachel picked up her spoon and jabbed it into the cake like it had personally offended her. The molten center spilled out, perfect, glossy, irresistible. She tasted it, and her eyes betrayed her for just a second. Delight, shock, then anger. "Not bad," she muttered. But the words were drowned out by everyone else raving about how good it was. And in that moment, I felt something shift deep inside me. The power wasn't hers anymore. It never really had been. She thrived on tearing me down, but when I stood tall, when I owned my place at that table, she was the one who shrank. But Rachel wasn't going to let me win without a fight. Her pride wouldn't allow it. As the table clinked glasses and cheered for my cooking, she leaned back in her chair, her smile sharp and dangerous. "Well," she said loudly, "you all might like it. But if you knew what really went into it, you wouldn't be so impressed." The air froze. My fork hovered midair. Everyone turned to look at her. She was about to pull something. And I knew it wouldn't be pretty. Rachel's next words would be a bombshell, an accusation meant to ruin me. But what she didn't know was that the truth she tried to twist would be her own undoing. The room was buzzing with warmth, with compliments, with laughter that for once didn't sting. I thought maybe, just maybe, Rachel would let it go. But no, she never could. Her fork clinked against the plate as she leaned forward, her eyes glittering with malice. "You all think this meal is so perfect," she said, her tone loud enough to cut through the chatter. "But you don't know the whole story." Silence. Every face turned toward her. The celebration stopped mid-breath. "What story?" my dad asked, his brow furrowing. Rachel smirked. "Do you really think she made all this on her own, please? She probably copied everything from YouTube and begged her little cooking class teacher to help her." "You're all falling for a performance." The words hit me like a slap, sharp, stinging. But I didn't flinch, because this time I saw what no one else seemed to notice, her desperation. Her voice cracked on the last word. Her hands trembled as she lifted her wine glass to her lips. She wasn't confident. She was cornered. My mom's face hardened. "Rachel, that's enough." But she wasn't done. "Oh, come on! Look at her. Suddenly she's some kind of chef, please? She's just trying to get attention." Like always. And for a moment the old me resurfaced, the one who wanted to run, to hide, to shrink under her words. But then I looked at the table, the empty plates, the crumbs licked clean, the satisfied smiles of people who had just tasted my work, and I realized I didn't need to argue. The food spoke louder than any insult she could throw, so I smiled. Calm. "I'm glad you think it looks professional," I said softly. "Because every single dish tonight, that was mine. My hands, my recipes, my work." A murmur of agreement swept the table. My uncle chuckled. "She's got talent, Rachel. Don't be bitter." The word landed, and I saw Rachel flinch. She forced a laugh, trying to wave it off, but it was too late. The guests were no longer amused by her cruelty. They were seeing her for what she was: petty, jealous, desperate, and for the first time in years, the knife she had always twisted in me slipped from her grasp. I thought maybe she would back down, but Rachel was never one to retreat gracefully. And in her desperation, she would make the biggest mistake of all. If her words couldn't destroy me, Rachel would try something far more dangerous, something that would expose her true self in front of everyone. Her words that night replayed in my mind like a cruel echo. "You really thought you could impress anyone with that?" I hated that she had gotten under my skin, but I wasn't going to let her have the final laugh. So I came up with a plan. A plan so simple, yet so sharp it would cut deeper than any insult. If she wanted to embarrass me in front of others, I would let her taste the same humiliation, literally. A week later, she had another one of her dinner parties planned. She loved showing off, strutting around like the perfect hostess, her smile rehearsed, her charm dripping like honey. But she wasn't nearly as good in the kitchen as she pretended. Most of the time, she ordered food and passed it off as her own cooking. This time, though, I volunteered to help her prepare. She didn't even bother to question why. After all, in her mind, I was just the sister desperate for approval. But here's the thing. Instead of helping her shine, I set her up for the same fall she had orchestrated for me. While she wasn't looking, I swapped her fancy recipe ingredients with my own little surprises. Salt where sugar should have been, vinegar instead of oil. Just enough to ruin the taste, but not enough to be obvious at first glance. The night of her party, I sat back and watched. I didn't have to say a single word. The moment the first bite passed the lips of her important guests, the reaction was priceless. Grimaces, polite coughs, and then hesitant stares at each other. And when someone finally said, "Did you really make this?" my sister's face drained of color. For the first time, she was the one stuttering, the one desperate to explain, the one trying to laugh it off. And me? I just sipped my drink and smiled. The humiliation she had gifted me, I had wrapped up neatly and handed right back. But this wasn't the end. Oh no, this was just the beginning. Because the more I thought about it, the more I realized. If she wanted war, I could fight smarter than she ever could. The room grew heavier with every awkward bite. Her guests exchanged those subtle, polite but pained looks, the kind people wear when they're forcing themselves to swallow something they absolutely hate. My sister, usually so smug, began to fidget in her seat. She kept insisting, "It's a new recipe I've been experimenting with. Maybe your taste buds just need adjusting." But no one was buying it. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. One of her friends, a sharp-tongued woman who never sugarcoated anything, put her fork down and said, "Honestly, this is the worst thing I've ever tasted at a dinner party." The silence that followed was brutal. My sister's cheeks flushed red, and she started nervously laughing, trying to brush it off. But the whispers around the table made it worse. I thought she was a good cook. She bragged about this meal all week. "Do you think she really made it?" Each comment was another dagger. And I sat there, sipping my drink, the picture of calm, as if I hadn't been the one to orchestrate her downfall. That night, her reputation cracked. People began to see her differently, not as the perfect, flawless hostess she pretended to be, but as someone who could fail, someone who could be exposed. And the best part? She couldn't even blame me, because unlike her, I hadn't humiliated her publicly with cruel words. I had let her own pride do the damage, but even as I savored her downfall, I knew something else. This wasn't over. Because if there's one thing about my sister, it's that she never forgets, and I could already see it in her eyes that night. The rage, the plotting, the need to get even. She had laughed at my cooking. I had ruined hers, but now, the real game was just beginning. The night ended with her guests leaving in an uncomfortable shuffle, tossing half-hearted thank yous over their shoulders as they made their way out the door. The once lively chatter in our home had been replaced by an eerie quiet. Only the sound of her heels clicking on the floor as she stormed into the kitchen remained. She slammed a dish onto the counter, shards flying. Then she spun toward me. Her face was pale, her eyes blazing, her voice trembling with fury. "You think this is funny, don't you? You set me up." I met her glare, calm but unflinching. "Funny? No? Necessary?" "Absolutely. You humiliated me in front of everyone for something as simple as cooking. Tonight you just learned how it feels." Her lip quivered, but instead of firing back, she fell silent. That silence was louder than any scream. For the first time I saw it, the crack in her armor. The confident, mocking sister who thrived on putting me down was suddenly just human, embarrassed, vulnerable. Days later, whispers reached me from her so-called friends. The same ones who had once praised her now mocked her behind her back. Her perfect hostess image had crumbled, and she was left to face the humiliation she had once dished out so easily to me. And here's the twist that sealed it all. A few weeks later, one of her closest friends came to me quietly and said, "You know, you're the one people actually respect now. You didn't have to tear her down with words. You let her pride do it for her." That's when I realized, revenge doesn't always have to be loud, cruel, or messy. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply holding up a mirror and letting someone see themselves for who they really are. My sister laughed at my cooking once, but after that night, she never laughed at me again.